Hey, this is Harold. I just wanted to finish up the last lecture so that I could spend all my time really introducing supply curves and talking about stuff that's in the readings that's due for tomorrow. So I just made excuse me, a YouTube video of some of the personal finance things. Excuse me. I hope with the index card that talk to your family or your partner, your roommates, about some of the ideas there and see if there's something that can help you operationalize in your own life the saving and investment ideas. Uh, it's hard for all of us. I must say, I was looking for a new car, and just the ability to walk out of the showroom and not buy anything when there's this shiny new car, but it's basically they're asking for too much money. I found that to be quite a challenge. Just the idea of paying cash for stuff is often helpful. Ignoring your credit card reward program helps you. And for most of you, it's a little premature, but thinking about the issues that we face in home buying. I remember when I bought my home, I fell in love with the particular house that we ended up buying. And I actually like our house a lot, but I'm sure that I overpaid because I was so in love with the house. Whoops. I was so in love with the house that I didn't um, that I basically undermine my bargaining power. And uh, because I think people realize this is 2003, but I think people realize that. Here's the card. Um, I'll mention a couple of things on here that I mentioned in class, but I just think are so important. Um, when you get your first job, if you're working now, maximize out your 401k, your 403b. Put in as much as you possibly can, certainly enough to get your employer match, and just put in a low fee index fund. Some of the target date funds that are queued to the year you think you're going to retire are good. Don't buy or sell any individual stocks. That's just, people are horrible at that. Um, Try to save 20% of your money. There's more complex algorithms that one can apply, um, but this is a good target. And this is your pre-tax income. It's hard to do. Pay off your credit card balance in full every month. That's just the single most important investment you can make. Your credit card interest rate is probably 16%. There's no investment that pays anything close to that. I'm a huge fan of Roth IRAs. You don't get any immediate tax advantage from the Roth IRA, but if you put money into it, you'll never pay tax on the investment gains that you've made. And that's just really valuable, especially if you're early in your career and your current tax rate is pretty low. You don't need the current tax advantage very much. That can be a great thing. It's also a nice strategic reserve for you because you can actually withdraw the principal. You can't withdraw the investment gains, but you can withdraw the principal without any penalty. So it's a kind of emergency fund that's really valuable. Avoid actively managed mutual funds. Any fund that's advertised on TV where they're like, we know what's going to happen to the economy, whatever. No, they don't. Uh, Financial planners and financial advisors are really valuable. It's really important that you understand when you're getting advice and when you're getting a sales pitch. And so asking advisors to commit what's called a fiduciary standard is really important. And that's basically that they're legally obligated to pursue your own financial interest, not theirs. And also this last one, which is a very crown point, promoting social insurance programs to help people when things go wrong. That's just really important that we all have each other's backs. Okay. I'm going to skip over all this stuff because I already talked about it. I do think, as I said in class, my card is decidedly middle class, and I could have done better at designing a nice card for people who didn't have many of the advantages that I myself have. I'm going to skip over this. I told all this stuff in class anyway, so I'm going to skip over that. It is striking how many people have asked me for advice at every level of income and how many of us mess that up. And it's just really, really hard to save for the long run. when you got so many things pressing on you, and most of us just don't have a lot of money to save. And it's really striking how all of us, are vulnerable, and those vulnerabilities show up in our finances. There, in my own community, there's a lot of people in foreclosure. Not so many in homelessness, not so much, but very serious problems with people who are in trouble paying their mortgage. And especially now that mortgage rates have come up, it's a real challenge. One of the things that I mentioned in class is how often money is the really complicated thing in your romantic relationships. I have so many students who say, my partner totally knows what happened last summer. We share our Facebook passwords. We never really talk about the $8,000 visa bill that I've got. Or it kind of bothers me that my partner has this big bill, but I don't quite know how to talk about it. And of course, everyone that we talk about that we try to help in our work, very often they face the same financial challenges that we do, but they're just a lot closer to the waterline. And so the stakes of this stuff is higher for them than for most of us. Now, many of us, I should say, also have some significant challenges. Many of us are young parents or otherwise have some significant financial responsibilities. This stuff's hard. I should also mention the issue of affinity fraud. Of course, Bernard Madoff has really, brought it to prominence in the Jewish community. But one of the sadder things that I witnessed in the mortgage foreclosure crisis was how many people who bought defective mortgage products, overpriced mortgages, things like that, very, very often these products were vouched for by community leaders, or there was a sales pitch that was done with great cultural sophistication. There were people who were unauthorized residents of the United States who have mortgages, and they were sold, really predatory products. And the people that were hired to sell them those products were often other unauthorized immigrants. And if someone from your church or your own cultural group is making a sales pitch for a financial product, that's actually a red flag. You would much better off with, Vanguard, some sort of a name brand thing that's got a brand identity to it. And any product that anytime somebody pitches to you distrust of Wall Street, that's a specific red flag. There's nobody that's an easier con than the person who is highly distrustful. That's one of the ironies in life, but it's one of the most consistent findings in the literature. And the reason is very clear. It's because if you're very distrustful, you're distrusting a lot of the mainstream information sources that can warn you that something isn't a good idea. And so one of the things that's really tragic about that, of course, is people have real reason to distrust Wall Street, to distrust American financial institutions. That's earned, that distrust, and it creates a vulnerability. And there's just a million examples of that. So by the way, I wrote this piece in the Atlantic. The best investment advice has always been too boring for TV. One of the things that I talked about in that piece was my mother was a huge fan of Louis Rukeyser. She had this incredible crush on this TV host named Louis Rukeyser, who's an older gentleman who had a show called Wall Street Week on public television. And it was a very urbane thing but he would also have on all sorts of financial gurus, and he would ask them, what do you think is going to happen to the stock market? He would advise people, find some product that you really like and invest for the long haul in that product. So a lot of women invested in legs pantyhose because that was just something that a lot of women liked. And so my mother found there's a restaurant in Rochester, New York, where she lived that she really liked a lot. And so she invested a lot of her money in it, and she lost it. And I blame Louis Rukeyser for that. That what he should have been advising is, buy boring low fee index funds. And, she listened to him many, many years, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And I think he gave genuinely bad advice. And the fact it was on public television, presented in this very culturally urbane way, that made it very compelling for her. By the way, one of the ironies in this, I have this thing in the Atlantic, and here's the ad. the ad is completely opposite to the spirit of everything I'm trying to say. It's just sort of hilarious. That's just from the Toledo Zoo, two of my friends. It is important to talk about wealth gaps. Sorry, I need to update these, but the basic point is pretty obvious. Just incredible wealth disparities, and and these were revealed and also greatly worsened by the foreclosure crisis. And if we went into COVID, we would have the details would be different, but it's the same story. Sorry, I need to update that, but I can tell you that it's very similar. And we see that all around Chicagoland. This is the area near my house. All of these dots are homes that are basically behind on mortgage payments. And this is the Southland of Chicago. And it's just incredible how serious the problem is. My house is basically right in here, and many of my neighbors we're in deep trouble. The house actually next to mine is now vacant, and it's not quite as bad as it was 2007, 2008, but it's not great. There, so here's just different ways we can zoom out. It's just a really bad problem in the Southland. 5 of Chicago's 10 zip codes with the highest foreclosure rates had populations that were at least 94% African American. And I should tell you that among African Americans, housing wealth is the dominant source of wealth that many people have. So, it's hard to underestimate how devastating the foreclosure crisis was and continues to be in Black Chicagoland. This was just where it was. 1/4 of all Latino or African American borrowers had lost their homes or were seriously delinquent, compared to 12% for white borrowers. And it's just incredible. And in the run-up to the foreclosure crisis, nearly half of loans to African Americans were subprime, so they're high interest rates. And the sad thing was, many people had these bad loans or disadvantageous loans, even when people qualified for better mortgages. And I should also say that subsequent research that's come out later showed that whites were also much more likely to refinance at lower interest rates. And so the interest rates, if you look at everybody with a $250,000 mortgage in America, white people on average have lower interest rates. First of all, because they got better mortgages in the first place, but also because we were more likely and more able to refinance and take advantage of the low interest rates that pertained until last year. Okay? And now, of course, there's differences in prior wealth, but even if you control for all that stuff, still a significant difference. Now, you might say 0.3 percentage points. Who cares about that? Well, that's per year. Imagine you're doing that for 30 years and somebody's borrowed $250,000. That's not a trivial difference. And that's after controlling for a lot of things that themselves are racialized. What does it mean to control for individual debt and credit histories? That's not coming out of nothing. That reflects a whole history of disparity. Okay? So now, one thing that we also know is that foreclosed properties and abandoned properties create challenges for properties around them. And one of the things that people see is very often when you have a vacant property, you see an increase in social disorder around that property, and that just creates a huge problem. Now, there's also stock ownership. 57% of whites, but 30% of blacks have stock investments, and measured as a percentage of annual income, big differences in retirement balances, things like that. And also in what people invest in, for a variety of reasons. Non-Hispanic whites and also some other groups, Asian Americans, tend to have a higher exposure to stocks in their investments. And so as the stock market has gone up since 2010, that has widened wealth disparities quite a bit. Now, some of that I think we could deal with through educational things, but that's not the real problem, or not, that's not the only problem. People with lower wealth have to take a more conservative approach to how they invest, particularly when they have family obligations and other issues where they might have to withdraw the money. When I put money into my retirement account, I basically know that I'm not going to need it until I'm going to retire. I basically know right now if I put any money in, it's going to be at least 10 years before I need any of it. So I can take a really long run perspective. If I have people in my family who have some serious financial needs that I might have to dip into my retirement to help with, I have to be a little bit more conservative, because next year I might have to draw on that money. And that plays a big role in people's decisions. And if you look at what's happening with 401k contributions and withdrawals, first of all, almost no workers were putting in remotely enough. So that's, SP, that's really pathetic. I'll fix that. So much more money. But it was everybody was doing way too little, but racial disparities were still striking. And now there's some things we could do that could improve that. I think that opting out of, when we've made the default, you're putting into a sensible target date fund and you can opt out of that. That helps people a lot. You want the default option to be the sensible thing, but there's other things going on too. So, just here's just a study that came out that just looked at how people invested over time. And you can see just, disparities were really growing. And there's a number of reasons for that. How much money people put in, how much money people took out, and what they invested in along the way. So now what was striking was the differences in contributions were not that different. If you look at the median balance, look at the difference in median balance, 37,000 versus 90,000, or 53 versus 90. Differences in contributions aren't that great. It's $1,500, $1,800 a year. Now, some of that is that it compounds. But the main thing was, look at the difference in withdrawal and loans. That non-Hispanic whites just had less of a need to withdraw that money or to borrow from that money, and that made a big difference in the balances. So people are putting in the money, but they often have to take it out, and that's a problem. And also because people were taking it out, they also tended to go for a less risky investment mix. Some of this, by the way, is mechanical. If you borrow money from your 401k, they often will make you take a less risky approach to the money that you have in there. That is kind of the guarantee that's the collateral for the loan that you took. So it's becoming, the 401k is more used as an emergency fund, a short-term saving vehicle rather than a long-term tool. And that makes it harder to really accumulate wealth in the long run. And this is a consequence of wealth disparities, because people really need that money. Things happen to your house. You have to borrow from your 401k because your boiler burst, or your foundation had a problem. My foundation had a problem this year. I didn't have to borrow from my retirement to handle that. I had other sources of wealth I could draw on. And now I don't think that the people who designed the 401k system, the main retirement system, it's not that they wanted to widen disparity, but they also designed it basically to benefit upper middle class people in a lot of ways. And one thing is, it presumes that workers have other ways to address their immediate life challenges. So it's pretty predictable that someone like myself can use that system better just because I have higher income. And that's just a real problem. Now, let me talk about credit cards. I must say, credit card companies do kind of remind me of the tobacco industry. Maybe not, maybe that's a little extreme. But a lot of the money that credit card companies are making, they are making by trying to exploit suboptimal behavior by consumers. And a lot of the money, not all of it, but a lot of the money credit card companies make, they're making on late fees, they're making on interest payments, they're making on penalties imposed when people exceed their maximum credit limits. And if you think about who is incurring these are often people of modest incomes, and also younger people who get themselves in trouble with credit cards. And who among us doesn't have some story of they behaved a little foolishly with their credit card? So fees exceed 30% of ADB's average daily balance. For your FICO is your credit score. Everybody with a FICO score below 560. So if you look at those people, fees exceeded 30% of average daily balance for people in that lower credit scored group, compared to 3% with FICO scores above 700. So the bottom half of the credit distribution is really paying a lot of money to credit card companies. And these are people, they're paying their bills. It's not like they are being irresponsible and not paying. They're overpaying because they're accumulating interest and things like that. And 30% of account holders pay off their bill in full. This is just free money that the credit card companies are getting. 13% of borrowers only make the minimum payment. And for a long time, your credit card bill sort of set things up that kind of cued you psychologically, say you have to pay at least $142 a month on this $1,000 bill that you owe or whatever. 15% of people making less than the minimum. The minimum payment, there's nothing good about the minimum payment. That's just something the credit card company set up. And a lot of people thought that there was something advisable about it because it was really put front and center on the credit card bill. And it's just, there's no reason to make the minimum payment. You should definitely try to make much more than the minimum payment. So here's just profit. What we have on the x-axis is people's credit score. And what we have in the red is total realized profit. And then what we have in the blue is realized profit as a percentage of average daily balance. And if you look at this, they're actually losing money on the people in the middle of the distribution pretty much. These are people that they're losing money on. They're gaining money on two different groups of people. There's the people out here with the highest credit ratings, and they're making money on those people because they never default. And, every time you use your credit card, they charge the vendor, if you buy something at Target gets charged some money by the credit card company. And that's, Visa makes money on that. And there's the annual fee, which they might make some money on too. So the people, that are way up here, they make money on, but look at how much money they make on the people down here. And these are people that are paying fees. They don't want people to default. They want people to run a high balance, pay interest fees, pay penalties, and eventually pay the thing off. And that's really what's going on with this group of people. And that's a real problem. Because these are people that are paying interest rates of like 15, 16% on money that they're borrowing on their credit card. So if you look at interest fees, interest charges and fees as a percentage of the average daily balance, I mean, look at that. Total fees, 40%. Interest charges, over 25%. And then when you get down to people who are at the highest credit ratings, so much lower. Still, by the way, high, but wow, a lot lower. Now, some of these abuses have been addressed under the Obama administration. There's something called the CARD Act, and you looked at that in the homework, and it's actually a very valuable thing. It returned $12 billion a year to consumers, and we can talk about some of the things that showed up in the homework, some of the requirements for disclosure, some of the limits on what could be charged, but a lot more could be done. Let me talk about home ownership. I think this is also where, this is not behavioral economics, this is kind of cultural economics. I do think one of the most toxic things in American life is this idea that you're not fully an adult until you own your own home. I remember being 40 years old, not owning a home and feeling so bad about it. My relatives kind of were looking at me weird. And, I was this PhD, I was a professor, I didn't own my own home. Like, what is this problem? Is it ever going to grow up? And there's a lot about home ownership that is just really toxic. First of all, it's the most leveraged and undiversified investment you'll ever make. Suppose that you live, so like I grew up in Rochester, New York. Rochester is the home of Kodak and Xerox. So the value of your home was very largely attached to how Kodak and Xerox were doing, because they would be hiring people or not. So if something goes wrong with Kodak eventually died as a company, because made chemical film, digital photography killed it. So a lot of people lost their jobs at Kodak because Kodak died. And then of course their house was less valuable because the biggest company in Rochester went under. And you have this very undiversified risk. And that's a big problem. Also, the more wealthy you are, the better mortgage terms you're going to get, and the easier you're going to be in managing the realities of home ownership. When things happen, you got to do home repair, stuff like that. Stretching to buy a home puts you in a very vulnerable position for all sorts of reasons. Now, the other thing that I would say about this is there's also a zero-sum aspect to home ownership that is very toxic. If I get suddenly rich because I invested in my retirement savings and I just made awesome investments over time, it doesn't make anyone around me poor in any way. It's not a zero-sum thing. It's just, I've got more money. Well, if I can make myself wealthier by keeping poor people out of my zip code in a not in my backyard way, I'm really benefiting, and I'm really hurting people. My property values are higher. We have a racialized housing market where we know that the proportion of underrepresented minorities in local schools is negatively correlated with property values. So if you can be racially exclusionary, you can raise your property values. That is one of the ways that the capitalist system rewards people for being racially discriminatory, for redlining, things like that. And one of the things in the Southland of Chicago is the places that did not redline 40 years ago, 50 years ago, have lower property values today. That is a very serious structural failure that that widens wealth disparities and rewards discrimination. There's also the question of the modern financial advisor, and I shouldn't use this word advisor because the word advisor actually comes with particular legal obligations. If you ever watch an ad on TV, they'll say, ask your financial consultant. Ask your financial professional. Whenever you see an ad where they specifically avoid the word advisor, that is a red flag, because an advisor has specific legal obligations to be your fiduciary. And one of the challenges that we have is that a lot of the best advice for people is not very profitable for the person giving the advice. And buy a low fee index fund. Don't try to time the stock market. Don't try to buy or sell individual stocks. There's not a lot of money to be made by giving that advice. You can get that advice, on my little index card. And so financial professionals have a problem that they actually, they need to get paid for what they do. And a lot of them actually do provide value for people. A lot of the value that they provide for people is stuff like, I got this family problem. I've got two children. I've got one child who is doing pretty well, and I've got another child who is really struggling. And I'm trying to think about how I can be fair to both my kids, and how do I think about college savings and stuff like that. Financial professionals, what really should happen is that they should charge you $300 to talk to you for an hour and give you really good advice. It turns out people will say F you if you try to charge $300 to do that. We won't charge. Nobody bats an eyelash if someone says, it's free for me to give you advice, and I should tell you that I do the Ben Franklin family of funds. And then you look and you see the Ben Franklin family of investment funds. There's these huge fees that add up to thousands and thousands of dollars each year. If you're investing, say, $100,000 of your retirement savings in there. But it's a lot easier for that person to say, I'm going to put you in this Ben Franklin fund that charges 1% a year, so that's $1,000 a year compared to this Vanguard fund, which is 0.1% a year, which is $100 fee. People won't complain about that, but they will complain if you say, I'm going to charge you $300 to talk to you for an hour right now. And it's just an incredible problem that we have. And it's not that people are criminals. They just push people into investments that are a little bit more costly than they should be. And people have those for 20, 30 years. Okay? Now, I should say that the audit studies that have been done, Sendhil Mullainathan led one of the most famous ones, really pretty discouraging, because it's not the bad apples, it's the typical apples that were doing things that really were very problematic. So they would basically send in couples who were actors who would come in and they would say, we just have our shoebox full of stuff. We don't want to make sure we're doing the right thing. We're investing in the right way. And they would go to local financial professionals and they would say, here's how we're trying to save for our retirement. And what they came in with was specifically designed, by experts. Some of them were the perfect portfolios. And some of them were like really bad, like all my money is invested with my employer or something like that. It's just really obviously bad thing to do in terms of, undiversified risk. Now, you might hope that the financial professionals would nudge people in the right direction. And in fact, what they were doing was they were nudging people towards costly, actively managed funds that were more lucrative for themselves. And in fact, very often they would actually nudge people into something that was very, very similar to what they had, but it was just more expensive. And then they had a financial incentive to do that. So among investors assigned the optimal portfolios designed by experts, 85% were advised to do something different that was more beneficial to the advisor and was less valuable to the customer. This is not the bad apples. This is the typical apple. And similar results, by the way, happen in Canada. This is not a US thing. This is a thing, that this is how they do. And it's really problematic. And the other thing that's even worse, there was a paper by Egan and Matvos and colleagues. Sorry, I just broke my pen. I get so worked up over this. That was the market for financial advisor misconduct. And this is people that are specifically doing things that are criminal or unethical, worse than putting you into the overpriced thing, but something that's really bad. The overpriced thing is bad enough. So what they did is they tracked 1.2 million registered financial advisors in the United States over a long period of time. Okay. Now, more than 7% of these advisors have been disciplined for misconduct or fraud. That is not a trivial number, 7%. That is a pretty high number. And 38% of the people that had been disciplined were repeat offenders. And those who committed misconduct and remained in the industry, of course, were much more likely than other people to recidivate. That's not too surprising, but it's clearly a problem. The thing that's really disturbing was how many of them worked clustered in firms, that there were particular firms that hired a lot of people with misconduct records. In fact, very often there was a supervisor with a misconduct record who was hiring people to work for that person who also had misconduct records. Okay. And it was clustered, by geography and by firm. And these were not names that were completely unknown. Let me show you. Here's just the percentage of advisors previously disciplined for misconduct. So here we have Oppenheimer and company, famous names. First Allied Security, pretty famous name. Wells Fargo, UBS Financial Services, Raymond James. These are not, some of these I've never heard of, but most of these I have. And that's pretty concerning. On the other hand, here's a bunch of ones where there was almost nobody disciplined. Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock Investments, UBS Securities. Notice UBS Securities is here. UBS Financial Services is here. I'm going to come back to that. Okay. Prudential Investment Management, Wells Fargo Securities is here. Wells Fargo's Advisors FN is here. Isn't that interesting? And here's the finding that these authors had. This is a great paper, by the way. A poignant feature of these tables is that several firms with the highest misconduct level share a parent company with firms that have among the lowest misconduct level. For example, approximately 1 in 7 advisors at UBS Financial Services have been reprimanded. UBS at the affiliate, UBS Securities, the share is 10 times smaller. One source of difference between these UBS subsidiaries may be their customer base. Advisors at UBS Financial Services help retail consumers with personal investment decisions. Advisors working for UBS Securities likely work on a trading desk and deal with institutional rather than retail clients. Okay. So firms that were actually their routine customer was a pretty sophisticated investor. They employed few advisors with histories of documented misconduct because basically that's unacceptable in that niche. You know, if your median customer is a highly sophisticated investor who's coming in with $10 million, you know what? They check. Who is it I'm dealing with? And because you can find out if someone's been disciplined, that there are databases that have that information. And so like with the Oppenheimer brothers, what they found was places like their Boca Raton office, you know, their Scottsdale, Arizona office. They're dealing with retirees who had a decent amount of money. You know, you're living in a really nice retirement area in Florida or in Arizona, something like that. But you're not a financial expert. You're just somebody that saved a lot of money over your life, and you just want basic advice. Wow. Think about that one. There are people who really need to read Dante's Inferno a little bit more carefully. If you know, their market niche is that 76-year-old retired couple in Boca Raton. You know, ordinary retail investors who are not particularly financially sophisticated are the sweet spot if you can find people that have real money. And that's what they were doing. And yeah, and there were particular offices, and the Oppenheimer brothers was a particular example where they just had particular offices with just a lot of people who had been disciplined before, and it was clearly that was the business model. And it was and you could actually see that wealthy retirees with limited years of education were the people that were being specifically targeted. And they're the people who they need the advice the most. And of course, that makes them, their very need for the service makes them the most vulnerable to being ripped off. And it just breaks my heart that this was going on. I think some of this has been corrected, but a lot of it is still going on. And it's just, you know, it's just remarkable. You know, I generally do not believe in very punitive penalties for people who commit crimes. Boy, this one pushes me. Now, the other thing is, what should be the regulatory standard? Most financial professionals are legally held to something called the suitability standard rather than the fiduciary standard. Let me explain to you what the difference is, because it's boring and complicated and important. Let's suppose that the right product for you is a low-fee index fund that basically invests in lots of companies across the whole economy, and there's a Vanguard total stock market index fund that does that. That's got fees of 0.1% per year. That's basically what I invest a lot of my money in. There's another thing that's put out by another company, Merrill Lynch or whatever. That's basically the same product, but they charge 0.8% per year as a fee. That doesn't seem like much, but that's accumulating over years and years and years and years. Well, that second one, if you're held to the fiduciary standard, you can't recommend that second one because it's clearly inferior to the first one. It's got a higher fee. And the fact that you as a financial professional might get a referral fee to put you into that 0.8% thing makes it even worse. Or if that's the company that you work for, that makes it even worse. Well, the suitability standard is this a suitable product for you? And the index fund with the overpriced fee, it's still suitable for you. In fact, they don't have any, under a suitability standard, they don't even have an obligation to tell you that there's a lower priced product. They just have to offer you something that's suitable. You know, they can't offer you something that's like the Bernard Madoff, we're going to steal your money thing. but they can offer you something that is clearly overpriced relative to something that they know about that they're not telling you about. That's the difference between suitability and fiduciary. And what could be more narcolepsy inducing? And the Obama administration tried hard to require more fiduciary obligations, and the financial industry really, really pushed hard against it, and was able to thwart a lot of that regulation. Elizabeth Warren was one of the people that pushed for this, and she was just completely right about that. And by the way, I should say, in a bipartisan way, congressional Democrats and Republicans often work to water down these regulations. A very concentrated interest group that did not want this. Okay? And they actually came out. Remember, in when health reform was debated, there were the health insurance industry paid for these Harry and Louise ads that were like this couple that were talking about how their insurance is getting all complicated, and that went after the Affordable Care Act. There was a similar thing that went after this fiduciary rule, and they had these commercials which they took down. It was actually from securefamily.org, and securefamily.org was the financial industry, where they would say, oh no, she's not going to be able to offer us that, she won't be able to help us anymore, she won't be able to offer us any advice. It was completely deceptive advertising. And I'll put in the chat, I made an ad actually called on the fiduciary standard that I'll put up. Just the industry came out with these very deceptive videos that were then taken down. And this is, by the way, how the organization was described. They put a partnership of America's financial advisors, life insurance agents, and life insurance companies that is dedicated to educating policymakers about the role our products play in the financial lives of 75 million American families. And of course, the advertisements never used the word fiduciary, never actually explained what the fight was, because it was just completely obvious that if they explained that people would immediately understand what's going on. I will put up in the chat, or I put up for you guys, this YouTube video. Let's see. I wonder if I click on it, whether this will work. Let's see. Here we go.
To have my cake and eat it too. So nothing ticks me off like when someone I thought I could trust gives me a bad recipe.
Retirement.
I was shocked to find Jim's been advising me using a suitability standard. Suitability, that means recommending I invest in funds and IRAs that enhanced his commissions and income instead of my retirement. Look how different our cakes came out. I should have been advised to a fiduciary standard.
What?
You heard me, fiduciary. That means your financial interests always come first. Unfortunately, if you're with a major financial firm, you're probably also guided under a suitability standard.
It's all in the fine print.
That likely means high fee investments instead of low cost index funds, leaving you with 20% less money when it comes time to retire. That's 5 years less retirement, less travel, not as nice gifts for the grandkids.
You're spoiled.
Worse retirement housing, and definitely a lot less cake.
I like cake.
That's a problem for you and a problem for everybody else. So I want you to do 2 things. 1, contact your representatives in Congress now. Tell them to support the Department of Labor's new consumer protections, holding financial professionals to a fiduciary standard. That's for the financial well-being of everyone you care about. 2, listen, whatever happens in Washington, print out my cake recipe and an illustration of the difference between suitable and fiduciary retirement cake. Share them with your financial professional. Then have a direct but cordial conversation, insisting they commit to a fiduciary standard in all your dealings with them. Thanks for sharing your cake, Jim. It was suitable. From now on, I'll keep my cake for myself. That's fiduciary.
Okay, so I'll put up I'll put that in the chat. I'm not sure that came out in the video because of the weirdness of the Zoom. So, by the way, I made another card for people with less income, and where we tried to be a little bit more culturally competent. One thing we talked about is financial coaches and some other things that we could do. I do think we have a problem that people in the greatest need of financial help are unprofitable consumers when they're provided with what they really need. So we have a policy failure. We have to figure out a better way to give advice to people about basic financial saving and investment stuff. And I think there's a real opportunity for the nonprofit sector to step in. And United Way, some other groups do that, but they could do that more effectively. And now actually there's a lot of complexities. One is people living with health challenges, and medical care is very expensive. One of the things that strikes me is so many of the patients in our hospital, just parking and buying food in the hospital cafeteria become really difficult. And of course, work loss, things like that. Financial toxicity of specialty care, just a bunch of people don't buy medicine because they can't afford it. Okay. And there's lots of examples. I just think we have a responsibility as a field to do better with this. I'll stop soon, but I just think this is a really important issue. Financial coaches can be helpful with stuff like credit card debt, budgeting, emergency funds, things like that. And the Working Family Success Network, United Way, various sources of help. And so I think these are valuable, and we need to be more sophisticated in using them. There was actually a really interesting randomized trial of financial coaches. And financial coaches helped people do the basic things better. Paying your bills on time, reducing balances on your credit cards, making regular deposits, chipping away on your high interest rate debt. Financial coaches don't help much with some of the bigger challenges like avoiding foreclosure and bankruptcy, because the problem is people don't have enough money. And it's also unclear that services help people spend less. That's just really hard, to do. But, having financial coaching is very good to help you do some of the basics better. Okay. And so I'm a fan of it, but it's not the cure for cancer. Okay. And I think, by the way, for patients in the hospital, for example, we really need to do something that's a little bit more specialized, and people have to understand Medicaid, understand health insurance. There's a specialized set of things people need to know how to do. Okay. Interesting about home ownership education. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau surveyed mortgage borrowers. Approximately 1/2 of people only considered one lender or broker, and that 77% submitted an application to only one lender or broker, which I did in my first mortgage. That's just, we didn't comparison shop, and that was kind of stupid. And we often relied on information from real estate agents, friends, relatives, or coworkers. We're relying on information from a real estate agent. That's not the greatest idea. First of all, that person really wants you to buy a house, buy an expensive house, and you don't know what their incentives are, or what their just personal connections are, and whether you're really getting unbiased advice. Most people experience significant unexpected home costs, and also a lot of struggling homeowners were specifically targeted for fraudulent practices, including foreclosure rescues, related misconduct. There a lot of the ads that you see on TV for people who have trouble with credit, you can imagine that's a scary domain where people can be doing ripoffs. There are some really nice some nice things. Here's the Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership, a 3-hour pre-purchase class on money management, and some one-on-one counseling for up to 2 years. in a capstone course on home buying. You know, graduates referred for private mortgages were 5.8 percentage points less likely to default. That's wow, that's good. You know, it's not the cure for cancer, but wow, that's helpful. You know, so this is one piece of the puzzle that can be really valuable. And I think what can we do? Use every tool that we have in our social work toolkit to help with people's financial challenges. And you know, understand if you're a social worker with people with serious medical problems, their medical bills and their debt are a real source of toxicity. Understand co-payments and deductibles. You know, for example, if trying to get someone to substance use disorder treatment, you know, you got to understand what are the financial pressures that's going to put on them, partly because it's going to hurt, it's going to be punishing for them, but also they may disengage from the treatment if it gets to be a real financial burden. And so just understanding that is just really an important part of our role as social workers. Normalize and discuss financial stress as a common challenge that we all face. So you understand what the financial pitfalls are of the particular client group that you're working with. Understand the practicalities of the common assistance programs people are going to use, earned income tax credits, SNAP, how people get plugged into health insurance. Understand if your clients include unauthorized immigrants. There's lots of ways that unauthorized immigrants can open up checking accounts, savings accounts at credit unions. There's lots of ways that people can be assisted to just live, access the financial system in a way that is not predatory. Now, understand that people are ambivalent about many of these financial challenges. And, you know, it brings up relationship issues, communication issues. It's stigmatizing. So we've got to bring the tools like motivational interviewing that we use for other stuff. And so here's some examples. And I think understanding the strengths and limitations of these referrals, if you have someone who's a health problem or a substance use disorder, these folks, they're going to know about the money issues. They're not going to know about these other things. That's, you know, other people need to bring that expertise. But I think we can really do a much better job there. And that's just a bird that I took a picture of. And so I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to stop recording.